What will happen before 2100? It can be hard enough to predict what's going to happen next week, never mind the next decade or the end of this century. But based on current trends, plus future agreements that were put in place years ago, we can at least begin to guess what our world will look like over the rest of this century. When it comes to partying like it's 2099, expect the following to become a reality. Oceans will be extensively farmed, and not just for fish. We will need to feed 10 billion people, and nature can't keep up with demand, so we will need much more ocean farming for fish. But algae farming is also on the way for renewable energy, and maybe even for growth of feedstock or resource extraction via GM seaweed or algae. According to Dennis Bushnell, chief scientist at the NASA Langley Research Center, saltwater algae that have been genetically modified to absorb more nitrogen from the air than conventional algae could free up to 68% of the fresh water that is now bound up in conventional agriculture. This water could have gone to thirsty populations. Thanks to DNA and robotic engineering, we will have created incredibly intelligent human beings who are immortal. This is more likely to be achieved by direct brain links using electronics, but GM will help a lot by increasing longevity, keeping people alive until electronic immortality technology is freely available at a reasonable cost. The idea that breakthroughs in genetics, biotechnology, and artificial intelligence will expand human intelligence and allow our species to essentially defeat death is sometimes referred to as the singularity. We're going to be able to control the weather. Some weather control technology is already in place to mediate tornadoes, make it rain, and so on. And thanks to concerns about climate change, a great deal of knowledge is being gleaned about how weather works. We're probably going to have technology to be able to control the weather when we need it. It's not necessarily cheap enough to use routinely, and it's more likely to be used to avoid serious damage in key areas. A majority of U.S. scientists are supporting a federal program to explore methods for Earth's climate engineering, otherwise known as geoengineering. These technologies are designed to protect against the worst effects of man-made climate change. Antarctica is going to be open for business. The area seems to be worth keeping as a natural wilderness, but that pressure will eventually mean that some large areas will be used commercially for resources. It should be possible to do so without damaging the nature of the technology, if it is good enough, and this is likely to be a condition for exploration rights. Before there's a rush to develop Antarctica, we'll most likely see a full-scale rush to develop the Arctic. Whether Arctic states tighten control of the region's resources, or find equitable and sustainable ways to share them, will be a major political challenge in the decades ahead. Successful, if not necessarily sustainable, development of the Arctic is good for the development of Antarctica. The ozone layer is completely healed by 2075. We haven't heard much about the ozone layer lately, but in the 70s and 80s, the humongous hole created by chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, harmful chemicals found in spray cans, air conditioners, and others emerged as one of the greatest threats to our civilization. If it got bigger, we were afraid that the sun's ultraviolet rays would freely rain down on us and quickly roast us alive. Fortunately, once scientists realized what the hole was drilling, numerous steps were taken to reduce the use of the chemicals that caused it. Since then, the ozone layer has been healing itself slowly. In 2014, the 300-strong United Nations report reported the first significant increase in ozone volume since it began to disappear. Still, it's a slow process. According to the UN report, the ozone layer is not going back to what it was in the 1980s until 2050. It will not be until 2075. Meanwhile, that the most damaged part of the layer, the Antarctic area, will fully recover. At its worst, the Antarctic hole was more than 30 million square kilometers. It's about 20 million today, which is still too big for a hole to decide whether we're going to turn into a world of water. One single currency in the world. We've already seen the electronic currency that can be used anywhere, and this trend will continue. It is quite likely that by the middle of the century, there will be only a few regional currencies and worldwide acceptance of a global electronic currency. This will gradually mean that the others will be out of use and that only one will be left by the end of the century. In fact, the trend is more in the opposite direction. The internet enables new forms of exchange and exchange of value. Local currencies are also being used by several hundred communities across the US and Europe. In other words, in the coming decades, look for many more types of currency and exchange, not less. We'll all be wired to computers to make our brains work faster. This is something we can expect for many people as soon as 2050. By 2075, most people in the developed world will use a kind of machine increase for their brains, and by the end of the century, almost everyone will. If someone else does this, you're going to have to compete. Hundreds of the species of the birds will extinct by 2100. Everyone loves birds, except the pure tipihedron from the birds. They're cute and colorful, and they make sure our nation's cats never go hungry. But at the rate we're going, By the end of the century, we're going to see a lot less feathered friends. According to a 2011 climate change study, the coming extreme weather, both hot and cold, is likely to start killing birds en masse. The study believes that if global temperatures rise 3.5 degrees Celsius, 6.3 degrees Fahrenheit, between 600 and 900 bird species will be extinct. What's more, according to the study, 100 to 500 more bird species will die for every extra degree of temperature. The most affected would be birds living in places where the temperature rarely changes so much. If those places suddenly get too hot or too cold, the birds are unlikely to be able to adapt and survive. While this number is low compared to all birds in the world, according to the American Museum of Natural History, there are currently about 18,000 species of ex-dinosaurs wandering through the earth and the skies. It is still an alarming rate of extinction. It would get worse if some places on Earth jumped over 16 degrees Celsius, as the UN fears. If that happens, we could lose half of our birds in less than 100 years. Nanorobots will flow around our body to fix the cells, and will be able to record our memories. Right now, medical nanorobots exist only in theory, and nanotechnology is mostly materials science. But this is a rapidly growing field. Nanorobots exist within the realm of possibility, but the question of when they will arrive is a different matter. California is going to lead the US breakup. There are already indications that California wants to split up, and that such pressures tend to build up over time. It's hard to see this waiting until the end of the century. Maybe the East Coast cluster is going to want to break off too. Pressures stem from the enormous differences in the ability to generate wealth, and people do not want to fund others if they can avoid it. Space elevators make space travel cheap and easy. First space elevators will certainly be around, and although cheap is a relative term, it will certainly be much cheaper than conventional space development. It will create a strong acceleration in space development, and tourism will be an important area, but I doubt the cost will be low enough for most people to try. Almost every aspect of nature will have museums, as much of the world's natural habitat will have been destroyed. It's not only about museums, but the Earth is on the verge of a major species extinction event. Protecting biodiversity at a time of increased resource consumption, overpopulation, and environmental degradation will require continued sacrifice on the part of local communities. Experts argue that incorporating the economic interests of local communities into conservation plans will be crucial to the protection of species in the next century. 83% of the Amazon rainforest will be lost by 2100. One of the saddest things that our planet has lost over the decades is our rainforest, and the way things are going, we're not getting any of it back anytime soon. In fact, we're set to lose a lot more of it before the end of this century. In 2009, the United Kingdom's National Weather Service released a report stating that, based on global trends, the world was set to warm up by 4 degrees Celsius, 7.2 degrees Fahrenheit, by 2055. And that's just the average. Some parts of the world can jump 16 degrees Celsius, or 28.8 degrees Fahrenheit. There's more to it, and we're all but boiling the world. Worse, this means that by the year 2100, we will have virtually no rainforest in the Amazon. Wolfgang Kramer, climate scientist at the German Institute for Climate Impact Research in Potsdam, projects that at least 83% of the rainforest will be lost by the end of the century. Amazingly, this might be a conservative estimate, as it is based on the possibility that the atmosphere will release extra carbon dioxide and help protect the rainforest from drought. Problem is, that might not happen, and if it doesn't, as Kramer so grimly put it, we risk losing the entire Amazon. That's provided we haven't lost our lives to heat stroke before then. Thanks for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, share and subscribe. See you all next time.